analysis of English orthography and what we know about the development of students decoding knowledge and spelling. So I'll spend a little bit of time telling you about the research, not too much, just to give you a brief idea, and people who are interested can look at the studies in more detail. We were funded for several years. We conducted design studies for a couple of years in which we developed curriculum and tried it out in adult classes and got feedback from teachers and from students and used that feedback to redesign the program and develop additional lessons. Then we conducted an experimental study over 2 years nationwide. 12 states were involved, 23 adult basic education programs were randomly assigned to 3 groups. One group got the MSDS experimental curriculum, and we trained the teachers. We had a 2 or 3 day workshop for teachers to show them how to use the program, and then they used it during the course of their instruction for 6 or 7 months. There was a control group, which were other programs that had organized reading classes, had to meet certain criteria, but they continued to do whatever they normally did. And so the program sites were randomly assigned either to a control group or to the experimental treatment. So it's a true randomized experiment. We also had a comparison group that had been found during a previous project looking at adult reading instruction. In the comparison group were instructors who were already using decoding curriculum generally developed for younger students. For example, Wilson or the SRA Corrective Reading or the Texas Scottish Rite program and so forth. So they already were using structured decoding curriculum, but not the ones that we had developed for adults. Overall, there were 34 instructors. We had almost 600 adult learners at one point, but attrition being what it is in adult education, we ended up with 350 adults who had complete pre-test and post-test data. Here's the participants. I think the sample is pretty typical of adult basic ed programs. There's a predominance of women, a very wide age range. About a third of the sample was not born or educated in the United States. This was our category for collecting information on non-native speakers. All of the students, all of the adults had sufficient English language proficiency to participate in English-only reading classes. So we did not include ESL classes. But despite that, of course, many of those for whom English was not the native language had somewhat limited English skills. And where we made the dividing line was that adults who came to the United States early enough to go to elementary school here, we included in our born or educated in the US population. So the 1/3 were adults who had come here too late to participate in elementary school. Diverse races, less than half of them were employed, very low income. We asked them if they had learning problems from school, and about 50% of them said that they had learning disabilities or learning difficulties when they were in school. This only for the US born. The foreign students didn't have such programs. We had 11 assessments of decoding, word recognition, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. We pre-tested and post-tested students, generally at 7 months or whenever the students left the class, background interview and classroom observations and so forth to collect information on instruction. Here's an overview of the pre-post test gains, and you should look at these numbers are standardized scores. They represent standard deviation, which is a unit that we can use that summarizes across measures. A standard a gain of 0.2 is a small but significant educationally gain. A gain of 5 would be moderate, and up around 7 or 8, 0.7 or 8 would be a very large gain. So you can see, if you look in the column treatment under word reading, for example, the treatment group grew 40.44 standard deviations. So that's a moderate sized effect. The control group grew 0.32. If you look down the rows, you'll see that for the first two measures are word reading measures. Then there are three measures of word attack, phonemic decoding, and the letter sound survey are all decoding measures. There are two spelling measures. Then there are two fluency measures, the passage reading fluency and the Tower sight word efficiency, which is single word fluency. And then there are measures of vocabulary, and reading comprehension. And generally speaking, the treatment group did better than the control group and the comparison group on all of the word measures, which is what the curriculum focused us on. However, the only one of the measures met the usual requirements for statistical significance, and that was the word attack, the Woodcock-Johnson word attack measure. So we got different results for our native and non-native, or U.S. born educated, non-U.S. born educated students. So here's a summary of the effects of the treatment. For the full sample, we got significant positive gains on word attack, and generally directions in the direction we expect that on all the word measures. For students who were born in the U.S. or educated here, so our native speaker group, we also got significant positive gains in word recognition and in spelling. So that covers the three areas of word skills. Interestingly, for the non-U.S. born educated students, we got strong positive gains in word attack, but the students in the control group actually did better on vocabulary gains. Probably because the teachers in the experimental group were spending more time on word skills and word attack skills and less on vocabulary. There were some other differences between the native and non-native speakers, independent of what treatment group they were in. So this is if you put all the treatment and control and comparison students together, the non-U.S. born students made greater gains over the course of the experiment on all of the word measures, word recognition, both tests, both word attack tests, one of the two spelling tests, fluency, and comprehension. So this has nothing to do with the experiment. It's just the fact that the adults coming from other countries made greater gains. My interpretation of that is that the U.S. born students who were still reading at a third or fourth or fifth grade reading level had some sort of learning issues that had prevented them from making progress during their time in K-12 education, whereas many of the non-native speakers were having difficulty reading in part because their English skills were limited, and so they were able to make more rapid progress on word recognition things. The one area in which the U.S. born students made greater gains was vocabulary. So I'm going to pause now and see if you have any questions that you'd like to ask about the research. If anything was, I didn't mean to give you a full explanation of it, but just a quick summary. But if you have questions about that, this might be a good time to ask those. Dorhan, did we get any questions about the research? Great, I'm glad you can hear me. I got worried there for a second. I can't seem to hear our moderator.
Am I coming through again?
There you
Yes,
are. Now I can hear you. Yes.
I was
Okay.
helping another person. So if you're looking for a few questions, one of the questions, well, it's up now. Are the statistics up in the resources that we will be showing them later on? Some of the statistics that you were talking about.
I think, yes, on the link site, there should be references to the research studies. The main paper was published in this journal for effective. I'll pull up the references. If we can't find them on links, I will share them with everyone.
Okay.
But the results have been published. The study was completed several years ago, and so the results are out and available for anyone to read. Okay. Anything else?
Yes. Someone was just asking, could you explain some of the types of tests, for example, word attack?
Sure. Let me go back and say a little bit more about the measures. So here's the list of the measures. So the first one is the RAT3 word reading test. This is just a test that has a list of words for students to read. It's not timed. The words get progressively harder, and the score is the number of words correct, and then that's related to the norms. At the pretest, the mean score on the word reading test was fourth grade. So that means that quite a few students were reading below the fourth grade at the beginning. And so that's what that one is. The second letter is the Woodcock-Johnson letter word identification, which is the same sort of test. It's reading real English words that get progressively difficult. Then there are three measures of word attack. The Woodcock-Johnson word attack test is nonsense word reading. So these are words that follow the patterns that occur in English, but they're not real words. And so they force the students to apply decoding skills to figure out words that they don't know. There's no way they can figure them out as sight words. The Tower phonemic decoding is also pseudo words, but it's a time test. So it's how many of these words can you read in 1 minute? And the letter sound survey likewise uses nonsense words, or pseudo words, we call them. Then there are two spelling tests. One is a standardized spelling test from the RAT. It's just like any spelling test. We developed our own spelling test that was focused on the patterns, the spelling patterns, the words, kinds of words that we taught in the curriculum. And the passage reading test is an oral reading fluency. It's how many words can you read correctly per minute. And the sight word efficiency is real words timed. And then the Nelson is a group administered reading test that has separate sections for vocabulary. So it's not oral vocabulary, it's reading vocabulary and reading comprehension. It's a pretty traditional reading comprehension measure. Students read paragraphs and then answer multiple choice questions about it.
You have time for a few more before moving on?
We can go on unless there's something. Yeah. Oh, okay. Let me explain that table. I see somebody has a question for clarification. Yeah, because I've got abbreviations, and sorry I didn't explain those. So the first column that says sample, that's everybody. That's across all three groups, the treatment group, the control group, and the comparison group. Those were the gains from pretest to post-test. And again, that number there is in standard deviation units. So a standard deviation is the difference between the 50th percentile and the 86th percentile. So 0.34 standard deviations probably represents a movement, say, from the 50th percentile to the 57th or so, or of course, it would be much lower than that. It's probably more likely a move from the 16th percentile up to the 30th. Okay. The second column is the treatment condition. These are the students who received the Making Sense curriculum. The third column is the control condition. Those were the learners who, the classes that continued with the kind of organized reading instruction they were already providing. And the third column is the comparison group, which were other classes that were already using decoding, teaching, using structured decoding curriculum, like the Wilson or the SRA corrective reading, but programs that had not been designed specifically for adults. So word attack, it means decoding, and it's separate from word reading because they aren't real words on the assessment. Right? If you want to know if somebody can decode something, if you give them a real word, they might know it by sight, and so you wouldn't be able to test their decoding that way. I see there's a question about native speakers. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, so let me come back to that question. That's a very good question, though. Okay, I'm looking at the time, and I think I'm going to go on and talk about describe the curriculum and what's available, and then we'll come back to other questions. I decided to start just with the scope and sequence. So there are 30 lessons. The first one's an introduction to the study of language. We tried to present the curriculum to adults as that they were going to be learning something about linguistics that most students didn't learn, perhaps. And so we talked about foreign words and spelling and where English spelling comes from and so forth. Then we had a unit, a series of lessons on words with short vowels, phonetically regular alphabetic words like cat and chip and so forth. This was intended to be review, though for many students, they could read the words, but they had difficulty actually decoding them. So it wasn't always review. The last lesson in each of these sections, by the way, is a review lesson. So lessons 2 to 5 introduced new material, and then 6 was a review lesson. Then lessons 7 to 8, well, you can see the scope and sequence here. Various ways to spell long vowels, the final E or VCE syllables, open syllables, and then we dealt with some particular issues, words ending with Y and the spelling rules that go with it, vowel digraphs and R controlled vowels, and then hard C and G, and then some review lessons. So that gives you a general sense of what's there. The lessons are scripted, and they are designed to move students fairly quickly through the material, in contrast to decoding curriculum that were in the comparison group, which can take a very long time for adults to go through. So we tried to it's really essentially a compromise between, we know that adults are often not available for really extended and intensive instruction. And so we tried to be efficient. So teachers, as you're working with students who need more help, the materials are designed to support reteaching with new examples. So core ideas. It's based on an understanding of English orthography. Orthography just means spelling. It's the study of spelling or principles of spelling. And this is Dick Vinesky's seminal work on why English words are spelled the way they are. And there's 3 reasons basically why words are spelled the way they are, other than historical reasons, like they come from all different languages, but from an analytic point of view. Some words are alphabetic. They're spelled the way they are because we have an alphabetic language. And so even a word like fantastic, 1 letter, 1 sound. But there aren't enough phonemes in English to cover, there's more phonemes in English than there are letters. So obviously we have to do something about that. We have only 5 vowels, letters, but we have a dozen vowel sounds. So we have patterns. So for example, can and cane, right? There's each have 3 sounds, but we mark the A as a long A by adding a silent E at the end, or ran and rain, or the shun in nation. So those are all patterns that have particular ways of pronouncing them. And then the third, very important influence on spelling is morphology, or the meaning of words. So, for example, consider the ed marker for past tense. That means something, right? It means past tense. And we spell it with an ed, even though sometimes it's pronounced as a t, like in jumped. And sometimes it's pronounced d, like in rained. And sometimes it's pronounced ed, as in chatted. So even though it's pronounced differently, we honor the meaning of it by spelling it in the same way. Or we have prefixes and suffixes like in replace. And then a word like pleasure. There's a puzzler for you to think about. Pleasure has, first vowel sound is a short E, pleasure. Why is it spelled E-A? Does that make any sense? Would the world be a better place if we spelled it just with an E? I'll let you think about that one a little bit. You can write in your answer in the chat window. What we know about the development of individual students, usually children, development of knowledge about decoding and spelling is that it generally follows a sequence. So first, students master the alphabetic principle. Well, they learn that words are spelled the way they are because of the sounds the letters make. And then that takes them so far, and then they have to learn about patterns. And then eventually, spelling and vocabulary instruction even becomes largely about morphology. about the meaning units and how you put together roots and affixes, and how that affects the spelling. Um, One of the things we found in our design studies that adult learners were often kind of intrigued by the idea that they were studying something that professional linguists study. So that made it a little more interesting, and we tried to keep that hook in our first lesson. Second core principle is that decoding and spelling are integrated. They require the same knowledge base about words. You have to know about the alphabetic and the pattern and the morphological influences to decode words and also to spell them. Spelling's harder, but we also know and believe anyway that spelling instruction, in fact, there's plenty of research evidence that teaching spelling influences decoding skills. Because when you teach spelling, students have to pay attention to every letter and think about how they go together and think about the sounds, and that helps improve their decoding skills. Also, in our design studies, we learned that adults were aware of their poor spelling and they wanted to learn to spell better. So there's a motivational factor there. So the lessons integrate. Nearly all of the lessons have both spelling and decoding activities in. Third principle is about multisyllabic words. So we're working with adults. They are motivated by dealing with larger words. Many times they can read the short words, even though they can't decode them. They don't have the decoding skills that they would need to figure that word out, but they know the word. And so we apply all the patterns to multisyllabic words right away. It's more motivating, and it forces the students to apply decoding skills to figure out the words. We initially tried giving adults pseudo words, asking them to pronounce things that weren't really words, but they didn't like it. But when we present them with a pseudo word that is part of another word, it's a syllable, that makes perfect sense to them. So that forces them to decode, apply their decoding skills, and then put it together to create a real word. It's also very generalizable to real reading activities. That brings us to the fourth principle is we're asking them to do something difficult, so we designed a strategy for decoding multisyllabic words. So it's a systematic approach to looking at a large word and breaking it down into syllables so that you can decode those syllables using the patterns that they're taught in the curriculum. The idea is to make the learners more independent, so they have a strategy when they're reading on their own or reading other material in class, a strategy that they can use to attack those big words. And we teach it using typical strategy instruction procedures of modeling and practice with gradual release. Here is that strategy. So we ask students first to check the context, read the rest of the sentence, see if you can figure out the word from context. We want them to be flexible. If they can get it from context and the beginning of the word, that's fine. Then look for chunks, compound words, prefixes and suffixes. If that's not enough, then take the root of the word, what's left, and divide it up. And so there's some routines that we teach them about how to divide it up. Basically looking for the vowels and then deciding where to break them and then trying to decode them, the individual syllables, and put them together. In doing this, they have to be flexible. Stress is a real problem for struggling readers. If we put the emphasis on the wrong syllable, then they have trouble getting it. So they have to learn about that and about the schwa. And then at the end to recheck the context and make sure it makes sense. So that's our strategy. Fluency. So we want students to become more accurate at decoding words and develop skills, but really ultimately we want them to be able to apply those skills fluently to reading and to read widely. So we include a repeated reading activities in the lessons. We don't have nearly enough time to devote to fluency within the lessons. But the lessons are designed so that instructors can use the same procedure, both the multisyllabic strategy and the fluency practice, to provide additional fluency practice and even to apply it with whatever other reading activities they have their students engage in. And then we built in progress monitoring. We have some advice in the teacher's guide about initial assessment and placement of students. But once students get started, you need to track whether or not they are learning the content that's being taught and remembering it. So each lesson ends with a progress monitoring assessment that is either reading or spelling words. And then every 3 to 5 lessons, there's a lesson review. And teachers use that to decide what to reteach. Each lessons have a common format. They have an overview, objectives, you can see. And I'll explain what each of these pieces are. Objectives, review, then the document of the day. I'll show you that and teach a new pattern, work on syllabification, have a progress check, and then have the fluency practice. So let's take a quick look at those things. This is lesson 7, which is the first lesson on vowel consonant E words, where the E makes the vowel long. So there's the lesson overview. It has all the parts listed, the objective, the materials, to point the teachers to what charts and activities from the back of the curriculum guide are needed. There are materials in there that instructors can make overheads or charts or put them on the computer, however they want to display them. The document of the day is just usually a very brief example of some sort of real life document that includes the pattern. So the pattern here is vowel consonant E. So here we have space, flames. We also have it embedded in a 2-syllable word, explodes, okay, and race, and space again, and life. Okay, so there's quite a few examples in there. And we start by reading this, and then the student reads it, and then the teacher says what they're going to be learning, and then kind of talks about those, kind of activate whatever students know about this, because they've probably heard this at some point. So we're trying to activate that knowledge. And then they talk about them. And so there's, how can we, they're learning the multisyllabic strategy already. So let's talk about explodes and how you divide that up. And the EX is a vowel consonant vowel, a consonant vowel consonant pattern that they learned about in the first section of the curriculum. So this is the introduction to the lesson. It's just a few minutes. And then there's direct instruction in the new pattern. Okay. And in this case, it's done through contrast, mad, made, pet, peed, so forth. Practice includes syllables that would be nonsense by themselves. So the students, for example, could probably read the word made, even if they have no idea how to decode it, because they recognize it, or peat, or bite. But when we give them clude, C-L-U-D-E, it's not a real word. So they have to apply the decoding skill to figure that out. And then we show them how it fits into the word. Same with 5. And they practice with reading and spelling. And then there's syllabification work. So we take the strategy for decoding multisyllabic words is introduced a piece at a time across the curriculum so that they apply whatever they've learned so far. So they have the strategy and they have the syllable types that they're learning. So far at this point in the curriculum, they've learned about short vowel or CVC syllables, and now they're learning about vowel consonant E syllables. So they would practice with words like hopeless and contemplate. All of these examples are made up of CVC and VCE syllables. And so we look for the vowel so we can see how many syllables there are, make decisions about where to divide it, read the separate syllables using decoding skills, and then put it back together. Then there's a progress check. In this lesson, the progress check is a spelling test. So they're mostly is a mix of vowel consonant E and a few review words at the end there. Okay, and you see there are multisyllabic words even here. So the same strategy is basically used in reverse. Say the separate syllables, spell each one, put them together. Then there's the smooth reading activity, which begins with applying the multisyllabic strategy to decode the word. So the teacher might model, for example, here's a little script from the lessons for the teacher to model the decoding. Steve saw here's a word I don't know. First, I'll check the context. Steve saw a blank at camp. Well, that could be lots of things. Next, I'll look for chunks. I don't see a prefix or suffix. So let me try to divide the word and read the syllables. So I underline the vowels, but not the silent E. So we've got an E and an I, and between them there's two consonants, the P and the T. So I'll divide between them. Let me see. REP, that's a CVC syllable. That must be rep. And the second one is a VCE, so it's got a long I, tile, reptile. Reptile. Let me check the context. Steve saw a reptile at camp. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to the curriculum. So let me pause again and see what questions have come up. What have we got, Dorhan?
Okay. One question was, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Please write down if this is not exactly right, but how much time was spent on each lesson? I'm going to scroll through. So it says, how long, amount of time,
Yeah.
or number of days that you spend on each lesson?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And the answer is it's quite variable depending on the teacher and the students. We designed the lessons to fit within an hour's activity. So we're shooting for 50 minutes or so for each of the lessons. However, and we encourage the teachers to, to keep up a pretty good pace and then to plan for reteaching or work with individual students who needed more help. Some of the lessons we found quite a number of teachers decided to break in two and spend two sessions on. That partly depended on their schedule, but also to some degree on their students. So you shouldn't really think that you can actually get through the curriculum in 30 classes necessarily. It will depend on your students. Okay, so that's a I hate to give this it depends answer, but that's the way it is. Most of the we worked with the same teachers over 2 years. They had different classes of students, and in the second year, it was ran a lot more smoothly. So most of the teachers actually were able to finish the lessons in 1 hour class period, though many of them decided to reteach some of the concepts when students needed more help. I hope I answered that one.
All right. Something you said there kind of leads into the next question. You said you worked with a few teachers. A few people have asked, is there training currently available? Actual
Ah,
PD
okay.
opportunities as far as this goes.
That's a really good question, and I actually have a slide about that in the next session. The short answer is we're not doing training, but there are ways to get training in the core material you need. But let's come back to that one. I see another one about that has to do about the context, managed enrollment, or open entry. Um, I think it's a bit of a problem to use this curriculum in an open entry, open exit program because you have students continually coming in and out. Then we designed this curriculum with the goal of efficiency um, to work primarily with groups of students, and it is sequential. So students need to understand the material in the earlier lessons in order to benefit from the later lessons. So it works a lot better in a managed enrollment program. The content could be taught to individual students or small groups, depending on the instructional resources available.
And there are a few questions, but maybe one more, and then we can keep going.
Okay.
Let's see. Would you recommend presenting the curriculum decoding in isolation or in the context with other components of reading?
Definitely in context, and that is a great segue to the next section. So let's take
Okay.
advantage of that. There we go. Integrating with other reading instruction. As I said at the beginning, it's not a complete reading program. By no way do we think that decoding and spelling is a reading instruction program. It's an important piece of reading instruction for students, but obviously students need to focus on comprehension. They need to learn vocabulary, and those are really critical. They need to learn about the purposes of reading, what it's good for, to write about their reading, and so forth. So this is one piece of instruction. So there are a couple of features of the curriculum that we designed with the idea that they would provide useful links to vocabulary and comprehension instruction. So, and fluency instruction. Okay. So for example, the multisyllabic word strategy. This is designed to be something that students, adults can use independently once they've learned how to do it. In order for them to learn that, they need quite a bit of experience. They're not going to, on their own, say, oh, I learned this strategy in my decoding class that I can use here while I'm reading this instructional manual for some other part of class. It's up to instructors to remind them, whenever you're reading, when you come across a big word that you can't figure out, use your word strategy. So that's an important link. And for teachers to model it in those other situations as well. So you're reading something together with students and you come to a difficult word, model using the strategy for them. So that's one important connection. Another one is about fluency. So we built in a fluency activity. We're not under any illusion that the amount of fluency practice that we included in our curriculum is going to be anywhere near enough. So, but I think it's designed more as a template for teachers. And instructors can use that same approach to do repeated reading activities with other reading materials in the class. And so basically the approach is let's go through the passage together and see if there's any difficult words we need to figure out. And then you can read it several times until you feel like you're able to read it smoothly and you understand what it says. And adults, well, actually students of all ages usually are, they usually do find that when they read the same material a couple of times until it's fluent, that they understand it much better. And the third connection that we tried to build in was about vocabulary instruction. So the emphasis of our curriculum on base words, multisyllabic words that have base words or root words and prefixes and suffixes has very direct connections to vocabulary instruction. So, and there are lots of approaches to vocabulary that do focus on looking at base words. Instruction. So what's the base of instruction? Well, it's struck. What other words have struck in? Destruction, construction. Okay, so what is the common meaning there? And then how we put it together with these prefixes and affixes, how does that change the meaning? Let's think about those. When students understand that morphological principle, they can figure out the meaning of more words on their own. So that's a connection, but of course it doesn't happen on its own. It only happens if instructors help students to make that connection between the curriculum and their vocabulary learning activities. Okay, did that answer the question? Oh, I see somebody has an answer to pleasure. I don't know if other people may have answered as well, but yes, pleasure is spelled with an EA because the base word is please. Okay. And so if you change the EA, then you'd lose the meaning connection. And it would actually be harder for somebody who hadn't seen the word. It's easier to read because it's spelled in the same way. The meaning connection is preserved there in the spelling. So that's why, yeah. Good for you, Barbara. Do we have other questions? This is a kind of a big issue, so I wanted to see if there's anybody has anything else to ask about this integration.
If I could jump in quickly.
Sure.
Thanks. If you look next to your the chat window, there's a taller window that says "Making Sense" at the top. A lot of people have been asking me for some of the materials and links. Although we're going to go through them, it seems some people cannot stay for the entire thing, but I definitely want you to get everything you can out of this presentation. So if you're interested, there's some useful links. We will be going through them in more detail as this continues, but in the meantime, they are there. A lot of people have been asking. Sorry, thanks.
Also, if you forget the the link to get the address, you can always go to the link site and go to the search window and put in making sense of decoding or just making sense. And then you'll find the link that way, or put my name in MacArthur and you'll get a number of things, but one of them will be the materials. Thank you, Dorian. That was good. Also, Dorian tells me that he can put this up in a way that you can download the PowerPoint if you want, and that's perfectly okay with me. So then you'll have the information to refer to later if you like. Okay, so somebody asked earlier about training, and um, yeah, it would be good. I'd love to come do some training. We don't have any formal mechanism set up for doing that. However, fortunately, I think um, most of what instructors need to know um, is, is available through other sources. So this is a short list of things that I think it's important to know. The curriculum is scripted, but you still need to understand the content in order to teach it effectively. So one thing is basic knowledge about English orthography, phonology, and morphology, what I talked about earlier, why words are spelled the way they are. In the materials in the introduction, you'll find some references to materials to read, written for practitioners that explain these concepts. And as you look through the curriculum itself, it also will help you to understand those ideas. So it's also a core part of many um, approaches to reading instruction. What we teach to our pre-service teachers includes this as a basic framework. Because to teach decoding, you really have to understand this business about why words are spelled the way they are and how that works developmentally. So that's the first two things. It's also important to have some basic knowledge about phonics concepts. You need to know what a blend and a digraph are, and vowel pairs, and what happens vowel consonant e patterns. Those terms and affixes, prefixes, suffixes, and base words. You need to understand that stuff. Another foundation of the curriculum is what's referred to as syllable types. So this is not, I probably should have put up a slide with the syllable types. You'll see it in the materials, but we have this in common with some other reading instruction programs. For example, the Wilson materials, many Art and Gillingham approaches are based on syllable types. And the syllable types, there's 6 of them. One is the CVC, or the closed syllable, which has a short vowel and ends with a single consonant. Then there's the final E that makes the vowel long, and so forth. The vowel pair syllable with 2 vowels that go together. And so that's a piece of knowledge. Once the students have learned how to divide words into syllables, then they need to recognize the syllable types in order to decode them. The teacher's guide has material on all this. And like I said, at this point, there isn't any formal mechanism for providing training, particularly on this curriculum, although I would be open to trying to figure out a way to do that. Okay. I see we're moving along our time. Oh, and I promised to talk about non-native speakers as well. We didn't specifically design the curriculum for non-native speakers, but we had a lot of. They did learn to decode. In fact, they made greater gains from pretest to post-test in decoding than the US-born students. However, compared to the US students, the curriculum didn't have as much effect on their real-world knowledge. And my interpretation of this is they learned the decoding fine. And the decoding, when you sound out a word, it gets you pretty close to the pronunciation. But if your vocabulary is not as large, then getting close is not good enough, right? If you get close and you know the word, that's great. Then you could say, oh yeah, you say emphasis. Oh, emphasis. But if you're not a native speaker and you say emphasis, you might not realize that it was the word emphasis. So that's a difference. Um, they need a lot more vocabulary instruction. I mean, this was one of the disappointing findings of our experiment, that the non-native speakers in the experimental condition actually made significantly fewer gains in vocabulary instruction than the students in the control condition. Um, so unfortunately, I think given limited time, um, those students probably needed a little more vocabulary and a little less decoding. So, so this is just an issue. I'm not really, I don't want to set myself up as an expert on working with English language learners, because I'm not. But the decoding principles are the same. It's still useful, but you probably want to use less of this and more vocabulary instruction with non-native speakers. Oh, there we are. Questions, other questions, because we have another 10 minutes or so if anybody has things they'd like to ask. Um, okay, so I see a question on there. I don't know if Janice is still there. Janice Wall asked about the targeted group. The targeted group is adult basic education learners. So if you missed the beginning, um, adults in the lower intermediate group who are reading, the general reading grade levels about third to seventh grade, but they're adults. So they were our age range in our study was 16 to 71, I believe. I'm just scrolling through the questions to see if there's any else to. Um, so yeah, teaching resources available. I don't know. Yes, all of the materials that I've talked about today are available free on the Links website. Um, the link is up there, the MSD, the useful links there, or you can go to the link site and type in making sense in the search and find them. To use them, you download the PDF. You would need to print out copies of the student book or the adult learner book. You're free to print them out and make copies, many copies as you like. It's in the public domain so that you can use them with your students. There are also charts and little guides for, little charts for students to keep in their book, or things that you could post on the wall if you want to blow it up or display it on your computer. So all the materials you need are there, available free of charge. Oh, okay, so you can still hear me, so I don't have to answer. My screen has, I've lost my screen. It just says share my screen. I know Dorham was going to show us something. But since you can still hear me, I will try to answer your questions orally. It's faster. Um, yeah, decoding. Someone asked about decoding. That's just learning how to figure out how to pronounce words. It's phonics instruction, really, is what it is. But it's more than phonics because it has to do with morphology as well. Um, right, it's not really phonics. It's much more than just phonics, but it's word recognition instruction, how to figure out how to analyze words that you don't know. It's generally called decoding. Here's my email. Okay, it's just my last name without the R because they only allow me 8 characters at udel.edu. Yes, I think we're running out of time here, but if people want to move over to the links reading and writing group, we can continue either live or asynchronously. I'll be happy to answer questions. And thank you for guests to telling it once again where the materials can be found. So signing off here in Bethesda. I hope that you found the presentation interesting. It's a little hard for me to judge in a webinar, but I hope to hear from some of you. Please don't hesitate to contact me on the discussion group at the Links community, or if you have individual questions, you can send them to that email. Thanks very much, and hope to see you again in the future.